And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I have changed my deck building style. Don't panic, have no fear for all of you people that have been watching my channel for so long. All of the advice that I have given about deck building, it all still applies, right? All of the removal, ramp, the cards you should be putting in your deck, the underwhelming commander stuff, that all very much still applies. The 5 rules for commander deck building, 6 things you need in your commander deck, all of that is all very much still relevant. It is just personally for me, I have started changing the way that I build decks or the way I look at decks as I build them for a number of reasons. And this video will be in a series of videos that will be leading up to my personal decks video, which is going to be coming up in a couple of weeks here because there's so much for me to talk about in that video, right? I was thinking about it and I'm like, man, there's going to be a lot I'm going to have to cover in that video. So I decided, you know what, why don't I break it up a little bit because that video is already probably going to be over an hour long. So I decided to make a couple of videos leading up to it to sort of break up the discussion a little bit. And this is going to be a big one, of course, because I've changed my deck building style a little bit. Now, what does that mean? I made a video last year, a video that I just made on a whim, but ended up really being an important video, and I'm glad I made it. It was called Choosing Your Commander. So how do you go about choosing the commander for your deck? And essentially, there are 2 ways to choose the commander for your deck. The first one is the most obvious one. I want to build around that commander, right? You just pick a commander. Maybe one came out in the new set that you really like and you want to build around it. So you make the choice first of the commander you want to build around, and then you build that deck. The other way is you just have a deck idea, right? The idea for your deck is I want to build a cycling deck, or I want to build some certain tribe, or I want to build this, or I want to do, whatever combo I want to assemble. I have some janky combo I want to assemble. Let's do that. And then you decide a commander based on that, based on the colors, obviously, that you want to play, and maybe or maybe not, the commander will fit the strategy of what you're doing. They are making a commander for every scenario at this point, but even the scenario that you're playing, maybe that commander isn't in the color scheme that you want to be doing, right? I've run into this problem recently with a deck I wanted to make. I wanted to make a red and white lands deck, and there is no commander that really fits that. So I ended up picking one that doesn't really fit the theme of what I'm doing. I will be talking about that deck, of course, in my personal decks video coming up, but this is exactly what I'm talking about here, where I am starting to become very much a number 2 method deck builder. I was 100% a method 1 deck builder originally. I only built around my commander and nothing else. I would find a commander, and of course it was that underwhelming commander, and that was 100% my strategy for all my decks. I would find an underwhelming commander and I would be like, okay, well, how am I going to make this good? How am I going to make this commander work? And so by doing so, I was very much building around my commander. And of course, I talked about this last week in my Monolith Commanders video, where that can be problematic a lot of times. It can be problematic for you if you build around your commander to the point where your deck doesn't really do anything if your commander's not on the battlefield. Now, of course, there are monolith commanders that you really need them on the battlefield in order to make your deck work, and your deck doesn't do much without them. But also, you can build your deck that way. You can build your deck in a way that you need your commander to be on the battlefield, or else it doesn't really do anything. I don't love that strategy. I've never loved monolith commanders. I try to stay away from them. I've always said to avoid them. But if you build your entire deck around your commander, you are now turning your commander into a monolith commander, even if it wasn't one. So I like to go in 2 different directions with it. Either I have a commander that, yes, I am building around it, but I don't need it to be in play for my deck to work, or I'm building around a commander that is just fitting the strategy of my deck, right? It is fitting the synergy of what I'm doing in my deck. And it is possible to replace my commander. And in fact, I have a few decks that I have replaced my commander. One most recently that I will bring up here, but again, I'm not going to cover it too much until I get to my personal decks video, which is my Melira deck. And I have brought up, I think, my Melira deck in a previous video. And again, a lot of people might have been wondering, what Melira deck? What's that? So my Melira deck used to be my Dragon Lord Dromoka deck. I have actually switched out commanders, and funny enough, that was my lone deck that was the number two style before, right? Before this kind of switch that I've done in the last year or so, my only deck where I was building the number two method, in other words, I was building the deck first and then finding a commander, was my Dragonlord Jamoka deck. The only reason I chose Dragonlord Jamoka for that deck is because it didn't allow my opponents to cast spells on my turn. And the lifelink was kind of handy too. And I had brought that up in the choosing your commander video because that was my only deck that I used the number two method, where I just had some combos that I wanted to pull off. And there wasn't really a commander that fit that strategy. So I just picked one that was beneficial to me, but certainly I did not need to. And there was many times I played that deck where I never ever casted my commander. I didn't need it. I switched out to Malira for a couple of reasons, which again, I will not get into in this video, but that was my deck, right? And that's exactly what I'm talking about with method two, is you can very easily swap out your commander and the deck will do just fine. My Tishana deck is also a deck that is a little bit that way, where I just wanted a Simic blinking deck to put some of my favorite creatures in there, like Coiling Oracle and Mystic Snake and stuff like that. And there was a couple other neat things I wanted to do. And I chose Tishana as the commander for that deck because she's got a great ETB, and obviously she wants there to be lots of creatures in place, so it does fit. I could swap out that commander. I don't know if there's a better option, but certainly I could swap out commanders for that deck and be okay. I might rearrange a couple of cards. But back to the topic at hand, I have been very much switching up the way I build decks, the way I look at decks, because as I'm building a deck now, I more want to do a thing for a couple of reasons. One, just a lot of interesting things that I want to be doing in the commander format that, again, you have to build a deck around it. It doesn't really fit in any other deck. But also, I don't want to put myself in that box of I need my commander in play in order for my deck to work. And I will give a perfect example of what I'm talking about here. Again, this is leading up to my personal decks video, so I'm going to talk about a deck that I have not yet put together in paper. I've thought about, the digital versions of decks, and I always have a few on the go, and am I going to talk about them in a video? And I've decided I will be bringing them up beforehand because, again, my personal decks video is only going to be covering my paper decks. This is a deck that for me is probably next up putting together in paper. I like it a lot. I've play tested a bunch. It's doing a lot of really neat things, and I probably will be putting it together in paper in the near future. Haven't yet though. And again, because it is a Method 2 deck, I haven't really decided on the commander yet. Boromir Gondor's Hope was originally the commander for this deck. I was, again, I'm figuring out what I want to do in the deck first, and then I'm going to find a commander that fits. And Boromir was one that, again, I'm still doing the underwhelming commander thing. I still don't want to have a super popular commander. This is a blink deck because whenever Boromir Gondor's Hope enters the battlefield or attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a human or artifact card from among them, put in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in random order. I will say this is a very unpopular commander. It's pretty good. A human or artifact, it's pretty easy to build around that. You actually don't even have to build around it that much. Your commander can enter the battlefield. Looking at the top 6 cards is a lot. And then, again, once you start blinking, that's a pretty good card advantage. You can attack with your commander every turn, and then on your end step, blink it with a Conjurer's Closet or something. So you're looking at the top 12 cards of your library every turn and putting humans and artifacts in your hand. Not too shabby. The reason I went with this commander, again, it works with the blinking theme, which of course this deck is, but also it works with probably the number one card that I was building this deck around, which was Containment Priest, because of course Containment Priest is a human. That is mostly the reason why I decided on it. There are a few other humans in this deck that certainly are important and I wouldn't mind having in my hand. Containment Priest is the big one, and that is, Boromir allows me to dig through my deck to get to my Containment Priest. Now, why Containment Priest? Well, very, very powerful ability, obviously. 1 on a white human cleric, 2/2 with flash. If a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. Very, very powerful ability. Obviously, if people are recurring creatures, it get exiled. If people are trying to cheat creatures into play or something, it gets exiled. It's exile instead, so it is a replacement effect. It is a very, very powerful card, and in my opinion, a card worth building an entire deck around. Now, why does this work with the blinking theme? Because of course I want to be blinking my opponent's creatures. This is an idea I've had for a deck for a long time. I've put together several iterations of this deck. I decided to do it again, and this time I think I'm going to make it stick. So the idea is here that, yes, this is a blinking deck, but of course we want to be blinking our opponent's creatures because that blink becomes a permanent exile if our Containment Priest is in play, but we can also be using the blink on ourselves if we don't have it in play, right? So I don't want to build a necessarily secret commander deck where I absolutely need my Containment Priest in play or the deck doesn't work, because now I'm in the exact same scenario I was with the Monolith Commander. I have a Monolith Commander in the 99 instead of in the command zone, so that's not helpful. So the deck works perfectly fine if we never get the Containment Priest. We do have a couple of one-shot backups like Hollowed Moonlight. We'll do this as a one-shot. It's an instant that until end of turn, if a creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. It's a one-shot Containment Priest. Mistcaller is also a one-shot Containment Priest. Sacrifice Mistcaller until end of turn. If a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and it wasn't cast, exile it instead. So there actually is a few effects that will do this. We need to be exiling our opponent's creatures, and some of my favorite creatures of all time, like Mist Meadow Witch, will work here. 2 white, blue, exile target creature, return that card to the battlefield under our own control at the beginning of the next end step. So again, this will work with us or our opponents. If our Containment Priest isn't in play, I can just use this to blink my commander and get an advantage off of that, or blink my Cloud Blazer, right? Any great ETB creature, which of course I have a lot in this deck. But once my Containment Priest is in play, this just becomes 4 mana exile target creature. And of course, it doesn't come back, right? That's sort of the strategy of the deck. Another favorite of mine, Gale Powder Mage. Whenever it attacks, exile target creature, return it to the battlefield under owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So whenever this guy attacks, it just becomes exile target creature if my Containment Priest is in play. If my Containment Priest is not in play, that's okay. I'll just blink one of my own creatures. So it does work. Parallax Wave, one of my favorites, which you can remove the fade counters to exile a bunch of creatures. And again, even if we don't have our Containment Priest in play, let's say we only have our Mistcaller, I Parallax Wave, remove 5 counters from it immediately, exiling 5 of my opponent's best creatures, and then I sacrifice my Mistcaller and I don't have to worry about them coming back, right? So a 2-card combo that exiles 5 creatures, not too shabby. Vanish into Memory, one of my all-time favorites. Just talked about this in a video about cards that never disappoint me. And again, that's why I gravitate towards decks like this, because I end up shoehorning a bunch of stuff in that I really, really love and enjoy, and I want to find room for in a deck. And Vanish into Memory is a card that I always want to find room for in a deck, but works extra good here. Exile target creature, you draw cards equal to that creature's power at the beginning of your next upkeep. Return that card to the battlefield under owner's control. If you do, discard cards equal to its toughness. So as I talked about in that video and several others, there's lots of great ways to use this card. I'm not going to go into all of it. It does work to just blink a creature, so I can use this to blink my own creatures if I want to, but it works particularly good here again with the Containment Priest because I exile my opponent's best creature, draw a bunch of cards, and then of course it's not going to come back, because it will get exiled by the Containment Priest or whatever other effect I have, and I won't have to discard anything. So extra fantastic fit here. And another personal favorite of mine that I've been wanting to put in a deck for a while that I have talked about before on my channel is Planar Guide. Really, really powerful, unique effect. 1 white mana human cleric, 1/1. Pay 3 and a white. Exile Planar Guide. Exile all creatures at the beginning of the next end step. Return those cards to the battlefield under owner's control. So there's a couple ways I can use this in this deck. I can just use this to exile all creatures. Of course, I have to have my Containment Priest in my hand. So I will activate this ability, blink all creatures, in comes my Containment Priest, or sacrifice my Mistcaller, or whatever you want to do, right? Use the one-shot effects is probably more likely in this scenario. And then, of course, those creatures don't come back. I've just essentially farewelled all creatures away. And because I have that in the deck, I also put one of my favorite combos of all time, Gather Specimens, in the deck. 3 blue, blue, blue instant. If a creature would enter the battlefield under opponent's control this turn, it enters the battlefield under your control instead. So now, again, we don't have the Containment Priest. You got to be careful here. This is not the easiest deck in the world to play. There are certainly some non-bows. Gather Specimens, if we use our Planar Guide, we'll have every creature enter the battlefield under our control. That's the combo, right? The combo is I exile all creatures and then Gather Specimens, and they come into play under my control on the end step. So it's a way to permanently gain control of every creature in play. Really neat combo that happens to fit in this deck, but also it works with all the other stuff, right? We don't just have to use our Planar Guide. We can use our Parallax Wave again, right? I have my Parallax Wave in play. On the end step before my turn, I remove all the counters and exile my opponent's 5 best creatures. And then on my turn, before the Parallax Wave goes away, I cast Gather Specimens, and they will all come back into play under my control. So it all does work. There's a lot of great synergy here, right? There also is another way that we can do it with Theoretical Duplication. This is a really neat card that works in the deck too, that doesn't see nearly enough play in the format. 2 and a blue instant. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control this turn, create a token that's a copy of that creature. So again, this will work with Planar Guide, where I can blink all creatures, then cast Theoretical Duplication, and instead of stealing everyone's creatures, I will just create a token copy of everyone's creatures. Pretty darn good. But again, it works with any of the blinking stuff, right? If I just have my Gale Powder Mage in play, and again, not my Containment Priest, I do have to be careful there, I can just say, okay, well, my opponent has a Vorinclex, I want a Vorinclex, so I will attack with my Gale Powder Mage, exile their Vorinclex, blink it temporarily, which is already handy because now I get to tap my lands without having them stay tapped down, and then Theoretical Duplication, and when it enters the battlefield on the end step, I will get a copy as well. So there's a lot of really neat interactions here with these cards. Another card, Hero of Bredegard, that I've wanted to put in a deck for so long, just happens to work really, really good here because of all the exiling, right? Blinking is exiling from the battlefield. So this guy just sits there and gets huge. It's essentially a win con in the deck. Pull from Eternity, again, another personal favorite of mine. Put target face-up card that's exiled into its owner's graveyard. So this is another sort of one-shot way to I Gale Powder Mage, remove your creature from the game. It's sitting in exile. It's gonna come back on the end step, but I don't want you to have your Vorinclex back now, so I will just chuck it in your graveyard so you don't get it back. Really neat interaction there as well. I realized one of the issues I have with this deck, of course, when I have my Containment Priest in play is a lot of times I do want to be blinking my stuff, and one way to solve that problem is by phasing it out. It's definitely going to be a target on the battlefield, so I want to make sure I can protect it. But with phasing, like Slip Out the Back, for example, not only can I protect my important creatures, but I can also phase out my Containment Priest if I want to blink my stuff, right? Maybe I just want to blink a bunch of my creatures. Maybe I want to blink my commander so that I can dig deeper into my deck to get more stuff. Slip Out the Back is a way that I can phase out my Containment Priest temporarily so that I can blink my stuff, because obviously Containment Priest works on me as well. This is definitely a number 2 method deck, to the point where Boromir, of course, doesn't need to be the commander at all. And I've even, again, this is one of the reasons I don't necessarily want to put it together in paper yet. I thought Sten Paranoid Partisan might be a good fit for the deck because it's sort of an ETB creature a little bit. White and a blue, human wizard 2/2. As Sten Paranoid Partisan enters the battlefield, choose a card type other than creature or land. Spells you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less to cast. So it does have an ETB. It is a commander that I want to be blinking. It has a blink ability itself. 1 white and a blue, exile Sten, return it to the battlefield under owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. And I'm considering using this as my commander for the deck. I haven't decided yet. I am going to post the deck list for this. The Boromir version is the one that I will be posting in the description below if you guys are interested. Although, again, because this is a number 2 method, it is very easy to swap out commanders. I guess you could use Brago here. That is the best blink commander, but I actually don't think it's a great fit here. And the reason why is because you mostly want to be blinking your opponent's stuff. And of course, Brago doesn't blink your opponent's stuff. It only blinks yours. So I actually don't think it's a super great fit here. You ideally want to be blinking your opponent's stuff, right? And of course, I don't think there's any commanders that do that. You know, whatever commander you think fits best here, right? There are maybe 2 or 3 cards in this deck that care about you having Boromir as a commander that you could easily swap out. If you went with Sten as the commander, I might swap out a couple of cards. Like, for example, I had considered putting Training Grounds in the deck because Training Grounds helps with, of course, the Planar Guide, makes that ability cost a lot less. It also is really great with Mist Meadow Witch because now that ability only costs a white and a blue, and it actually helps with Sten as well. Not a lot, but it does help. So If I was to switch to Sten, I might put Training Grounds in the deck. So there's a couple of swap outs here, maybe. But at the end of the day, because it's a number 2 deck, I can very easily swap out the commander that I want that fits. And this makes it so that this deck is more uniquely yours, which is another thing that for me is kind of important. I made a video about this on my Discord recently because I had a patron asking about my personal deck lists, which I will get more to in that video again. For me, I don't love the idea of people playing carbon copies of my decks, my personal decks. The ones I put on my channel, great, that's what they're for. My personal decks, having people playing carbon copies of them, I'm not a huge fan of. This is a great way to make it your own, right? You just swap out the commander to the one you think fits the best and maybe a couple of cards. Now you're doing that really neat idea that I come up with. You can do that, but you make the deck your own, right? So that's another advantage to doing the number 2 method, in my opinion. The deck list, of course, is in the description, as I mentioned, if you are at all interested. The important takeaway, though, from this video is that for me, I have really moved into the number 2 method of deck building. That is likely the way I'll be going forward from here on out. I mean, things could change, of course, but the last probably like 3 or 4 decks I have made for myself have been with that method, as you will see when I get to my personal decks video. You guys let me know in the comments below. Are you a number 1 or a number 2 method deck builder? Maybe both. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.